Good morning. I'm going to share with you my screen here and welcome. We're going to talk about chinchillas and wildlife. So this was designed around classes and around knowledge that I've gained over the years studying wild chinchillas. The photo we're looking at is of a domestic chinchilla. Just to make this clear, this is not a chinchilla, a wild chinchilla's photo. It's a domestic chinchilla that's been placed outside in the Andes and mountains for a photo opportunity. Our funding here comes for this and many of our projects, almost all of our projects, comes from private donors like you, ZGAP, a zoological society of conglomerates, I guess, of zoos in Germany that help pay for our work, and they have for a couple of decades, and the Tulsa Zoo, which has been funding us, I think, for about a decade now. They make all of our projects possible, and they make this possible. And this is our way to teach others more about wildlife, more in depth about wildlife and chinchillas in a group effort. And it's funded by these two organizations. My name is Amy Dean, and I've been studying chinchillas for about 30 years. I'll be talking through these. If you have questions, you can email me, amy.dean@gmail.com, and I will answer. The book that this is going to be based off of, and it has the most useful information, it's the most affordable, is Raymond Dasman's Wildlife Biology. Now, any wildlife biology, ecology class is going to have most of the same information. This book is older, but it's, it has the fundamentals, and that's what we're interested in. We're not interested in all these equations and ecology and all this complicated stuff. I want to teach you wildlife, not teach you a master's or a PhD level class. This is just for the general public. It could work for undergraduate. I've taught this class to undergraduates, as graduate students from France have taken this out at our field station with a little bit more detail depending on our audience. So this is just for the general public. We're going to start off with what Dasman, I believe he starts his book off with, and what many people just don't really think about is, when were we separated from the rest of the world, of the rest of the plants and wildlife and animals? When were the humans separated? And why? Why did we separate ourselves from everybody else? So there's a distinction that's been made, and it's indoctrinated in us from the time we're born. Basically, we always know it's us, and that's wildlife, and that's plants, and that's animals, but we're not part of that nature, and that has major consequences, and has had major consequences over time. Speaking of time, we're going to start here when I found, and lots of researchers on chinchillas will talk about these papers, but I thought I'd show them to you so you can actually see. So this is, I'm going to have to shuffle papers again. Let's see. Let me go back here. This is Padre Joseph de Acosta, and he's a Spanish Jesuit missionary in 1591, and he writes about his time in South America, and he says that chinchillas, this is what he says on chinchillas, is another small beast like a squirrel. They have a wonderful, smooth, and soft skin, which they wear as a healthful thing to comfort the stomach. Not the chinchillas, and this is what someone else from London writes, Bennett, and he says that they're not talking about the chinchillas, they're talking about the humans using the chinchillas to warm their stomachs, like a hot water bottle, I guess they would say, and other parts of their body that need warmth. And they use the chinchilla fur to make rugs and coverings. And this is in 1591. So 1591, the first account, for Europeans at least, of someone writing down about chinchillas and introducing the world to them, really. So then an English Sir Richard Hawkins, he wasn't a sir at the time, he became a sir after the Spanish got a hold of his ship off the coast of in the Pacific Ocean somewhere. He went to jail, and when he got back to England, they made him a sir. So Sir Richard Hawkins, and he writes that amongst others, they have little beasts like unto a squirrel, but that he is gray. His skin is the most delicate, soft, and curious fur that I've seen. And the royalty wait, and the noblemen and the rich people wait for these furs when they're sent over to Europe from South America. And he says they call this beast a chinchilla, and of them they have a great abundance. And that's 1593. We move on to 1782, and there's other ones in the middle that are mixed in here, and they're quoting other people and quoting other people, and like I am also quoting other people. I'm not doing direct quotes on much of it, but the Zoological Society of London, which we'll get to it here in a minute, is the guy that really compiled all this information and tried to declutter the information, because it appears that in some of this, they're talking about the people they don't have a firsthand account of the chinchilla. What they have is hearsay and parts of pelts from different animals that might be mixing up and stuff. So we get to Molina. Now this is important. This person he's Chilean. And he says here, La Chinchilla, must land in hair. Let's see if I can find, they say that the animal, he says, is another species of ground mouse or rat. Instead of hair, it's covered with extremely fine and soft ash-colored wool of a sufficient length for spinning. The animal is about 6 inches long. It has small ears, a short nose, and teeth like that of a common mouse, and the tail of moderate length covered with silky hair. Now, maybe he's working with some of the chinchilla, maybe he's working with some of the parts from other animals. It's a little conglomerated, but the important thing here is he says, musklan and hair, scientific name, 2 words. And so this is a binominal nomenclature, and each species, a plant and animal, has their name is like a first name and a last name, a genus and a species. The genus is capitalized down here, genus, chinchilla, capital C, and the species is not. The species specific here. And if you're writing these, you're going to italicize them. If you're handwriting them, you're going to underline them. So let's look at the chinchilla. It's an animal, obviously, so it's in the kingdom Animalia. Its phylum is chordata, meaning spinal cord. The class is mammals, mammalia. These are the animals that have hair, give milk to their young for nourishment. Then we have, so that's kingdom, phylum, class. Now we have order. It's a rodent, rodentia. Of course, the chinchillas are rodents. They have 2 incisors, upper and lower incisors, then a diastema where there are no canines, and then they have their molars in the back. So there's a little space in their gums where there aren't any teeth. The family is Chinchillidae. The Chinchillidae family consists of 3 different types of animals. All right, we have the chinchillas. There's 2 species of them. There's viscachas, mountain viscachas, and they look a lot like a chinchilla. And usually when you see a picture of a chinchilla in the daytime or something, it's not a chinchilla, it's a viscacha, a mountain viscacha. And then there's the plains viscachas of Argentina, these beautiful, huge animals that don't look really much like either of the 2 of them, but because of their skulls and however they've been put into Chinchillidae also. So then we have the species or the genus Chinchilla, capitalized, and the species specific land and hair. And this is what Molina has called must land and hair. Now, this species specific will never change, but sometimes the genus will change because it'll be like, oh, well, maybe this isn't a chinchilla, maybe it's something else, but that doesn't have, it's not happening for chinchillas, but for other species, sometimes you'll see how they change the gender. Well, what it did happen for chinchillas, because at first it had mus for mouse, land and hair. Now it's chinchilla, it has its own genus. These are photos of chinchilla land and hair from Alco, Chile, where these are from my study site. This is a project I ran. So you can see the animals, but we'll go more into depth and another lecture on methods and all of that. But the way that we can tell the different animals apart and their relationship is their cuttings on their ears, really. So this here is the father. This is the son of group B, we'll say. This is group A's mother, and see how her fur's been displaced where this little baby's been lactating. And this is myself, the first time I traveled to Chile in 1995 to study chinchillas in the wild. I am holding a wild chinchilla, but it is captive. It's not out in the wild. It's been injured and it is living at the reserve. And these are people that help take care of it. And they really just showed me around my first time there. So that was the chinchilla land and hair, the long-tailed chinchilla. Now we're going to go to the short-tailed chinchilla, short-tailed, brevicadata. Cadata's tail, breve is short, short-tailed. Now I said that these genus and species don't change that much. The genus usually changes a lot more than the species specific, but it turns out that they have changed the chinchilla, the short-tailed chinchilla, back to chinchilla, sometimes you'll see it listed as Chinchilla vermicadata. It's because when these, way back when, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, when they were naming the animals, people then realized, oh, this is the same animal as this, and this person, whoever named it first, gets to call it what they called it. And so it was originally chinchilla. They switched it back there. It was known as Chinchilla vermicadata through the 90s and the early 2000s, when I was first studying these animals back in the 90s. And here are pictures of wild short-tailed chinchillas. This is, I'm holding one in 2001 when they were rediscovered in Chile. And then we have an infant or juvenile here. Actually, it's a pretty young one by the shape of its, by the length of its tail and the way it's holding it. These are in Chile and Bolivia, these photos. And we know, well, I'll get to their distribution later. So with the chinchillas, what we have is, and the whole reason we're doing this lecture and my life has been nothing but chinchillas, is because these animals are endangered. And why are they endangered? And it's because of the fur trade. And it's not a recent situation at all. Let's see if I can find this piece of paper real fast. I think it was the, oh, I don't know where to put it. Anyways, by the 1700s, they were already talking about how, oh, here it is right here, 1824. In 1824, Bennett from the Zoological Society of London has written, the Peruvian skins are either brought to Buenos Aires from the eastern parts of the Andes or sent to Lima. The extensive use of the fur has lately occasioned a very considerable destruction of the animals. So they've already noted by 1824 that the animals population, it's decreasing dramatically because of the fur trade. The records I have here are from one port in Chile, the one closest to where I work. And they show that in 1898, 330,000 chinchilla pelts were exported. So that means about 1 million animals were killed. Because for every one that's exported, we think that 3 animals were killed, a 1-to-3 ratio on a pelt that could actually be exported. We go to 1899, 356,000. So another 1 million chinchillas are killed. And let's see, 1900, 265,000. So there's a decrease there. But in all, in three years, we see about 1 million chinchillas exported, and 3 million have actually been killed for that 1 million to be exported. Those other 2 million, they weren't in a good enough shape to be exported. So here we have from 1895 to 1919. And what we see is a lot of animals have been killed. This is in hundreds of thousands. We're looking at a bar graph because these are quantities, and quantities should be graphed in bar graphs. A line graph would be like for temperature, a point in time. So we have the number of pelts in thousands here on our y-axis, and on our x we have the year. And it just shows that during this 26-year period, 3 million pelts were exported from Chile. So that's about 9 million animals killed. And at the end of this, you can see a dramatic drop off. And right here is when, in this time period here, the last part of from 1915 to 1920, 1920, the South American governments start enacting laws to prohibit the exportation of the pelt, because they're getting really seriously concerned about the animal. And it's not feasible at that point really to export them anymore, because you can't find enough to kill them. It's just not, they've gone through as many as they can. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about breeding and wildlife populations that become endangered, and their breeding characteristics and their reproduction rates. So the Zoological Society of London talks about the first live chinchilla was brought to London by Captain Beechey in 1829. 30 were born in the gardens between 1848 and 1908. And he's talking about the long-tailed chinchilla, Chinchilla lannan hair. And you'll see that Molina is credited with naming the species. Remember how he had called it musk lannan hair? They changed it to Chinchilla lannan hair. Just scientific things. We know we're talking about. The reason that they use these scientific names is to distinguish and for people to know what animal you're talking about. But look, it took them a while to figure out that all these people that were calling it musk lannan hair and chinchilla and all these other names, it took them a moment to actually get together, or not a moment, it took years for someone to figure it all out. And this is where we're at today. So, and in 1929, he brings the first live chinchilla to London from his voyages. And then it was the first time that they had a live specimen, so they could really look at the animal and try and understand its personality a little bit. And then he goes on to say, such is the history of our knowledge of this animal until the arrival of a living specimen. This is Bennett, who brought to England and presented to the Zoological Society. And then a second individual of this interesting species has lately been added to the collection, 1929, by the kindness of Lady Knighton, in whose possession it had remained for 12 months previously, prior to her presenting it to the society. And it says it's good-tempered, mild in its disposition. And it's probably the consequence of having lived with someone that is so tame. Now, we're talking about tame, not domesticated. Domestication goes on over a process in time. And this is a domestic chinchilla, long-tailed domestic chinchilla. These animals go through domestication, and what happens is when you're breeding an animal for fur, you want larger animals, you want them to have thicker fur, you're breeding for the quality and the color of the fur. So this animal here, he's huge. He's not what you see in the wild. He's about twice as big as a wild chinchilla. So let me see where we're going to go with this conversation. So we have the long-tailed chinchilla. This is the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And they list the chinchilla as endangered. Sometimes you'll see it listed as a critically endangered, depending on the time. It goes back and forth, vulnerable. And these are number games that they play with it. So the long-tailed chinchilla, I want to talk a little bit more about him. I'm going to skip back to some pictures of him so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's go back. So that's the short-tailed chinchilla. Here's our long-tailed chinchilla. So the short-tailed chinchillas are native to, we're talking about the long-tailed chinchillas. See, there we go. Let me get the right paper here. So long-tailed chinchillas are native and endemic to Chile. That means they only live in Chile and they were normally there. This species does not exist outside of Chile. It's evolved there and that's where it lives. The females are larger than the males and weigh from 370 to 450 grams. That's about half size if you look at what of the domestic ones. The tailbone has 23. And that's why it's the long-tailed. It has more tailbones, it has a longer tail than the short-tailed. They have large ears. Both their tail and ears aid in the cooling of their body temperature by circulating blood to these areas. So those are the air conditioning parts of their body. The tail aids in balance and communication. You know, they'll wag their tails to communicate with each other. They live in colonies from sea level to the foothills of the Andes, or the lower Andes proper. Sea level, most people think of them as mountain animals. Well, the sea level and the area that we're talking about, the sea, they're out on the coast. I've seen the pictures. It's a rocky area, but it's at sea level. It's not high in the Andes. It's the other chinchilla that lives high in the Andes. They live in a semi-desert environment. It's very arid, a Mediterranean climate in the southern part of their range. The natural predators include owls, the great horned owl, the barn owl. There's some other owl species there. There's 2 fox species that we see almost daily at our station, at least one of them. He likes to try and catch the rabbits that are exotic and not native to the area, that were introduced in our feral. They're not even feral, they're just exotic wild rabbits that shouldn't be there, that just destroy the native vegetation. And then we have a couple of cat species, Colo Colo, which is the pampas cat in our area, and we've got and the puma, or the mountain lion, or cougar. It goes by a bunch of different names, and those we actually have on camera from these camera sites from right outside of the chinchilla burrows. These animals here are not living in between rocks. These animals here are living underneath these plants here called puyas. Okay, let me go to the short-tailed chinchilla. Same thing as the long-tailed chinchilla. It's a chinchilla. It's not the same thing as an animal, same information I'm about to give you. So these animals they live in Chile, Peru, Bolivia, and Argentina, historically. Currently, we know of 1 colony in Argentina, 1 in Bolivia, and a couple handfuls in Chile. So that's 10 to 12 colonies that we know of. They have shorter tails than the long-tailed chinchilla, having only 20 bones, as the long-tailed has 23. They also have larger bodies. They weigh a bit more. The weights are between 500 and 850 grams. They're hefty little animals. It's a lot bigger in my hand there. than a wild short-tailed or wild long-tailed chinchilla would be. You can see how short its ears are. They're adorable. This one was very docile. It did not bite me. I was amazed. I think it had just given in to being captive, or it had been taken from the wild. Horrible, tragic story, in my opinion, for a university experiment, and then it never was returned to the wild where it was supposed to go back to. This one either died or was given to a breeding institution. So they're higher in the Andes where it gets cold. And so that's why they have a bigger body and shorter ears and a shorter tail to conserve that heat and keep themselves warmer. They also live in colonies, and we don't know very much more about them because no one's spent 30 years studying them. Okay, let's go back to the IUCN. So the long-tailed chinchilla is currently listed as endangered. That was quite a tense moment in my life, having them they wanted to list them as vulnerable. I think there might be between 2,000 and 5,000 of them in the wild. I'd probably go more towards about 4,000 if I had to do a really firm guess. So to me, that doesn't sound like it should be endangered. I think it should be critically endangered. My own personal opinion, not how the IUCN uses their mathematical models to decide if an animal is endangered or critically endangered or not. And then we have the short-tailed chinchilla, which I talked about. If you take your pen and you put 12 dots, you're going to put one in Bolivia here, one in Argentina, and 10 dots along here. And that's pin dots, the size of your pen, your writing pen, or a sewing pin, a needle. It sticks some holes in there. So this is a huge range that they're over. This is their believed historical range, but there's 12 little pin dots in there. And those are the colonies that we know of. So if we know about 10, well, I'm being generous. I'm saying 10 in a colony, that's 120 animals if we have 12 colonies. That should be critically endangered. But because of its long range and the numbers game and the formulas, they're only listed as endangered and not critically endangered. And also a lot of this is politics with mining, and the biologists getting paid by the mining companies to say, oh, we think there's more. Oh, no, that's not endangered. So it's just a game between biologists, conservationists, mining companies, because these guys sit on gold and copper, both species of chinchillas. So it wasn't bad enough we killed them for their fur. And now we're going to take out the rest of their habitat. And that still continues today. And it really makes me upset. And I'm only saying that because this video is available to children to watch. I have much stronger feelings about this. So because of them being hunted so severely and being thought to be extinct, in the 1970s, Connie Mullis, a wonderful woman that has visited me in Chile, and she was sent down to Chile in the mid-70s, and her goal was to find chinchillas, and if there were any, to set up a reserve. And she worked with local people and Baldomero and some other people. And in 1983, the Chilean government created a national reserve for the chinchillas, the long-tailed chinchillas in Alco in Chile, where it exists today. And I'm going to stop there for now, and I'll come back next time. I think we can go out of order and go into methods, because I'm really passionate about the methods, and then we'll skip back and talk about wildlife classes and techniques and terms. And